This is We the People with Forrest Wilson. And now, here is Forrest Wilson.
And welcome to the latest edition of We the People, otherwise known as The Resistance, with your citizen newsman and editor, Forrest Wilson. Happy Memorial Day weekend. I sincerely hope you're having a great weekend, and thank you for tuning in. You know, I overheard the president here in the break talking about reaching out to our veterans. Well, I can think of one veteran that needs to be reached out to, and that's Sergeant Andrew Tomoresi. He was recently picked up on March 31st on the other side of the border, just over the border after making a wrong turn. And unfortunately, he had a cache of registered guns with him, legal guns here in the United States, but the Mexican government saw fit to take and put him in a notorious prison. I would hope that the president will reach out to that veteran today and get him released. Are you a socialist? I believe you are. At least you're being forced to become one, comrade. I mean, you know, everyone is being forced into socialism. And the reason I say that is, how can you possibly reconcile the spending with the government we're getting? Incompetence at best, at the top, all the way to the bottom. And this government is feral, and it's deadly. It's the feral government. I don't think scandalous really begins to describe what's really going on. No, I think in a lot of ways the term scandalous and scandals is being used to obfuscate what's really happening. I mean, are you in compliance? Do you even know what I'm talking about? There's 530 feral agencies, plus GSEs, that's government-sponsored enterprises. And it's impossible to know whether or not you're in compliance. There's over 1 million regulations. And what purpose does it serve? Does it serve the people of this country? Does it serve liberals? Does it serve Republicans? Does it serve Democrats? I don't care what you think you are. You're a socialist, and it's being forced upon you. And it does serve a purpose. It just doesn't serve you. And really, this beast is serving itself and those who feed off of it. And I'm not talking about welfare recipients or the poor. I'm not talking about the gender confused, women, minorities. No, it's everyone. I don't know where this is going to lead, but the only thing that I can say to you is that you might be a socialist. You know that they're creating regulations at the rate of one regulation every 2 hours and 9 minutes, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It's impossible to know whether or not you're in compliance. I want to play a clip for you, and I think Congressman Joe Garcia is a Cuban or of Cuban descent. And I want you to hear what he has to say. This is Jack, it's clip 5. Have you got clip 5? Just listen to what this man has to say. This is a representative of the people, quote unquote.
Two of the safest cities in America, two of them are on the border with Mexico, and of course the reason it is, we've proved that communism works. If you give everybody a good government job, there's no crime.
There's no crime. Communism works. Well, I would say that throughout history, communism has really brought about just a couple of things. Really, just a couple of things. Misery and death. I don't know what else you can say about it. But you know, with the growth of government comes the fact that this government, the first government in history to know every single thing, from finances to your DNA eventually, once they initiate this Affordable Health Care Act, they'll know everything about you. They listen to your phone calls, to your text messages, to your emails. And, you know, I talk to a lot of people and they say the same thing. Oh, but my life's boring. Why would anybody be interested in that? Yeah, your life probably is boring, but at some point, do you think you might find yourself in opposition to some of this? I know when I opposed the Affordable Health Care Act on a different radio station, I found myself in 4 simultaneous audits that most people would break under. And these audits of a business that never had a single consumer complaint, over 4,000 customers operating in 5 states, not a single consumer complaint ever to any federal agency. And yet I spoke out against the Affordable Care Act because I felt like it was the wrong direction for America. And I found myself in 4 simultaneous audits. They can and will use the power of the central authority to force your compliance, period. And they've already done it. I mean, look, there wasn't a single Republican that voted for the Affordable Care Act, and I doubt a single Democrat read it. Well, I want to talk to you about the debt. This is from the Heritage Foundation, and I had to read it a couple of times because the first time through, I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. The median family income in the United States is $52,000. What if a typical family spent money like the federal government? They use the term federal. If they spent money like the federal government, they'd spend $64,000 a year, which would mean they'd put $12,000 on the credit card every year, despite already being $312,000 in debt. The truth of the matter is the median family in this country owns about $312,000 worth of debt and growing every day. Now, if you think about that, there's absolutely no way you can pay that off. And the Heritage Department, or the Heritage Foundation, goes on in another article, and they talk about the nation's long-term spending trajectory remains on a fiscal collision course. You really have to think about what they're talking about. A fiscal collision course means a collapse of the financial system that we know. And once that happens, I'm sure the government will be standing ready in the interest of security to step in and nationalize almost everything. And they're on their way to doing it right now. I was in the mortgage business, and I was a mortgage lender. That was my 5-state operation. And that particular industry really tried to keep up with the rules and regulations of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. What they basically did was they dropped all of the requirements, literally all of the requirements to obtain a mortgage. And some of those loans were called the no income, no asset loan. It was strictly credit score driven. And when the financial collapse happened, you saw the banks get recapitalized with taxpayer money. And the mortgage brokers, not the lenders so much, but the brokers were demonized. And guess what the federal government did with the Frank Dodd bill? They put in floors and ceilings to ensure that the mortgage broker couldn't survive. They capped the income that the mortgage broker was allowed to make. And when you look at it, you can't run an office on it. That meant your choices were very, very slim to none to survive it. They were basically operate as a one-man show or go out of business. Well, I closed my doors the day before Frank Dodd went into effect because I knew as a mortgage lender with the ceiling that they placed on us, there was no way I could operate my business. I couldn't meet the capital requirements. What I'd done for the prior 10 years was suddenly now illegal. And they didn't look at all at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. In fact, I don't think anyone went to prison. I can't name one. But I know a whole lot of people that lost their businesses and their jobs. And for what purpose? We're still on the same collision course. It may not manifest itself again in housing, but it will be back around. We can't possibly pay off this debt. I don't know anybody that's prepared to pay another dime in taxes. They can't raise them. If you confiscated all of the wealth in this country right now, it wouldn't even make a dent in the national debt. And they talk about it as though it's someone else's debt. No, it's our debt. Jack, are we due for a break? Because I think we've got a guest coming in. I want you to stay tuned. I've got somebody that knows about socialism and wants to discuss these topics with you. Joel Gibson. I'll be right back with Joel Gibson, documentary filmmaker, to talk about socialism.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here is Forrest.
And thank you for tuning in, WBOB AM 600, The Answer. You know, I was alluding earlier to the forcing of socialism onto the American public. And one of the things is if you're silent, you're consensual. And if you consent, you're complicit. I don't know about you, but I will not be silent, and I will not be a co-conspirator with the social agenda of this feral government. And you shouldn't be silent either. Discuss these matters with your friends, families, and associates. It's the only way. And if you're really brave, run for elected office. We need citizen legislators. I want to introduce my guest. His name is Joel Gilbert. He's the director and writer of political documentaries Dreams from My Real Father, 2012, Atomic Jihad, Ahmadinejad's Coming War, and Obama's Politics of Defeat, done in 2010, and Farewell Israel, Bush, Iran, and the Revolt of Islam, 2008. Welcome, Joel, to The Resistance. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me today.
Well, thank you for coming. I know it was kind of short notice, but I noticed that you're an alumni of George Washington University.
That's right. I did my MBA there, and I've been out in California ever since.
I did my MBA there as well in the same time frame you were there.
Oh, really? What year were you there? What year did you graduate?
I graduated in 94. I started in 89. It took a while. I was going part-time.
Okay, well, maybe we got the same vibes at the time.
We must have, but you do look familiar. I'm going to send you a picture of myself. You might recognize me.
Great.
Okay, I want to talk about your new film, There's No Place Like Utopia. Give me a synopsis, and when can we expect the film's release?
First of all, the film will be released in July. We're starting in Denver, and the formula is to start in one large market, then we'll go to 10 markets, and then we should be nationwide by the end of August, 2,000 screens. The film is kind of I call it a Michael Moore style film because I run around the country to different cities. I go to meet people in Denver, Newark, Chicago, Detroit, and I'm searching for some answers. And the question is, what is the reality of progressivism in America? And I talk to people in Detroit who've been living in the ruins of progressivism. These cities have been under progressive control for about 60 years, and none of them have been progressing. They've all been regressing. And I look deep into the roots of the progressive ideology, where it comes from, and talk to people and learn a lot about what they've been through and what their strategy is for getting out of this progressive hell on earth. So it's a very entertaining film. I like to think of that it's both humorous and horrifying, and I think it can go a long way toward showing a large body of the public what's really happening.
Is there a difference between progressivism and socialism?
Progressivism is simply a new name, more modern name for communism. The Communist Party USA was founded in 1922, only a few years after the Bolshevik Revolution in Chicago, and they developed strong Marxist organization throughout the United States all the way through the end of the 30s. There were a lot of professed communists that were loyal to Stalin and loyal to the Soviet Union throughout the country. So it kind of came in waves. During World War II, it kind of went down a little bit. In the 60s, they came back very strong. Obama's pals like Bill Ayers were the vanguard of American communism in the 60s through the SDS and Weather Underground, and they were promoting the Communist Manifesto. They were not anti-war protesters. They wanted to have a revolution to destroy America and bring down America. They acted on it as well. They thought that if they would bomb some buildings and murder policemen, that they could cause this groundswell of revolution to help bring down the government. The idea failed miserably because it was evil. No one in their right mind would want to destroy the Constitution and replace it with this Communist Manifesto. So the Weather Underground, Bill Ayers and his gang went underground pretty much during the 70s, When they emerged in the late 70s, early 80s, they decided on a new strategy. They realized that you could get more people to follow you if you said different things. So they changed their rhetoric. Instead of saying, let's destroy the Constitution, they said things like, we want to help middle-class families. We want to help poor people. And instead of being called communists, they decided to use the word progressive, progress. We want progress. So by changing their rhetoric, they were able to infiltrate and slowly take over the Democrat Party over several years, such that the Democrat Party today is a radical socialist party. Obama's election was not this sudden political phenomenon. It was really the result of an American socialist movement that has been quietly infiltrating the U.S. economy, media, journalism for decades. And what we see today is the Democrats with a hidden agenda. Barack Obama, as I demonstrated in my last film, Dreams from My Real Father, he had a completely different family background and a different agenda than he told people about. Personally, his real father was not the Kenyan Obama. His real father was a hardcore communist out of Chicago named Frank Davis who moved to Hawaii. Obama admits to being raised by Davis, and Obama became his ideological father, and he pursued an entire life in this little-known world of American Marxism back to Chicago, where his real father was from. And then when Obama ran for president, he had no intention of fulfilling any of his promises. He said he was going to cut the deficit in half, the most transparent government in history. If we talk about health care, it's going to be on C-SPAN, on and on. He passionately lied about everything. And that's why in this film, I have my new film, it's called There's No Place Like Utopia. And we use, this is kind of a play on the Wizard of Oz. Dorothy says there's no place like home. The Wizard of Oz, you know, if you follow the yellow brick road, this magical wizard is going to solve all your problems, and everything's going to be great. You're going to be in utopia and paradise. In the movie, of course, the wizard turned out to be a fraud, and he sent Dorothy to the witch's castle where she was taken prisoner in a dungeon. So the analogy in history is quite obvious. We talk in the film a little bit about Mao and Stalin and Castro and Pol Pot. These people said they were going to start paradise on earth. Just follow the yellow brick road. And they killed 100 million people in peacetime. They sent them to gulags, collective farms. They starved to death because these utopians were trying to force humanity into this paradise on earth. And if you didn't fit, you had to be eliminated. That's the history of socialism.
And Joel, I think that's happening right now. In fact, I think we're already socialists. What do you think?
I think we are to some extent, but I believe, based on my experience, and you'll see in this film, that a lot of people have had it with progressivism, especially African Americans that suffered the most from this in these inner cities. I went to Chicago and Detroit. These people are, it's like going to the CPAC convention. These people are suddenly hardcore conservatives. They don't want any part of the progressive agenda. They don't want amnesty for illegals. They do not want government handouts. They don't want to smoke marijuana. I think America is still a strong traditional society, and that the socialists, Democrat socialists as I call them, the only reason they won the election in 2012 is because they followed their formula. Their formula is to lie, have a big lie to take power, and then once they take power, to use the tools of state to maintain a permanent hold on power and maintain the lie. So if they didn't control the narrative, control the information, we would have known about Fast and Furious that this was a White House inside job to blame American gun shops for the murders going on in Mexico. If they had not controlled the information, we would have known about Benghazi, and they would have been out.
They're controlling everything, in my view. Now, yeah. I want to talk to you about racism and how this fits into it, because in 1980, I literally moved to Barack Obama's neighborhood. Okay. I moved myself to Oahu. Okay. And one of the things I experienced there, I'm a white guy, and the term haole I'd never heard before. I was alone in a new place. I'd moved from the East Coast, and I experienced just incredible racism. Now, I still have friends in Hawaii to this day, and I've been back probably 25 or 30 times. I have some friends that I've had for 30 plus years. and many of them are Native Hawaiians. But how does racism fit into this whole thing? Because the society that I saw when I moved to Hawaii was very racist against white people.
Well, Hawaii has several things going on. They've got an island mentality, certainly, that it's all about islanders versus mainlanders. That's one thing going on. If you are a native Hawaiian and you've been there for many years, even if you're white, you do get better treatment than an outsider, than a mainlander. So those are different issues. In terms of the way racism is used by white, you do get better treatment than an outsider, than a mainlander. So those are different issues. In terms of the way racism is used by socialists, they use minority groups, very typically, to get them to be upset about racial and economic differences, and then use their discontent to take power. Look at Barack Obama himself. The Marxist groups in Chicago in the 70s, early 80s, were not having any success getting the black church groups to join their Marxist causes because blacks were religious people. They didn't want any part of this Marxist atheist nonsense. So they brought in from New York Barack Obama, who was a front man with a black face, to infiltrate these black church groups. And the job of the community organizer, that's the nice name they use for it, the real job was actually community agitator. And his job was to rub salt in their wounds and get them upset about various issues, and then use their discontent and anger to take power and get elected.
Joel, I want you to stay with me through the next segment. I want to talk to you about what's happening to McDonald's.
Okay.
And we'll be right back. This is Forrest Wilson, AM 600 WBOB, The Answer. You're listening to The Resistance.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
And we're back. I'm talking with my guest today, Joel Gilbert. He's a director and writer of political documentaries. His latest film is There's No Place Like Utopia. Joel, we were talking about McDonald's, but before we get into McDonald's, how does the left use unions?
Well, the initial story was to infiltrate the unions and then use them as a mass group to strike and paralyze business and attack the free market system. The Soviet Union was very big on infiltrating American unions and then using them. Very interesting story in my last film that Obama's real father, Frank Davis, was sent to Hawaii from Chicago by Communist Party USA on orders of the Kremlin to infiltrate the trade unions in Hawaii and start a strike with the idea of expelling U.S. naval forces from Hawaii, which were seen as a obstacle to Soviet expansion in Asia. That was 1948. They had a 6-month strike that paralyzed the island, eventually failed. But that shows that Obama's father was a Soviet agent, and this is the man that he admits that raised him as well. And this is why we see the trade unions are so important to the socialists.
And you've got the president talking about the minimum wage and how people need a living wage, and all these protesters show up at McDonald's headquarters, arguably the most successful hamburger chain in the world. They're everywhere, and I happen to love McDonald's. But what's the real story there?
Well, like everything with these socialist causes, it's based on simplistic talk and a big lie. The reality is that very few people are on the minimum wage. It's simply a starting salary, and you immediately get raises if you're good. Even if you're on minimum wage, you're probably getting some government assistance. If everybody's wages get pushed up, it causes inflation in the economy, so that wage becomes irrelevant. You just lost it anyway, and the entire economy suffers. That's basically the reality of the economics of it. There's no basis in economics simply for saying, let's give people a higher wage. Well, you can con naive people that don't know better into voting for you if you use that kind of rhetoric. But the reality is it's a destructive economic policy, and all you have to do is look at Detroit and Chicago and Newark, and you can see the results. There's 60% unemployment in Newark. If the minimum wage were lower, half those people would be working, at least in some starting kind of job, and then getting raises and experience over time. So the idea of raising the minimum wage has destroyed jobs and harmed the economy everywhere.
I want to go back to your film, There's No Place Like Utopia. The timing of it's interesting. You've timed it pretty much to where if people do see it, it'll be prior to the elections here in 2014 in November.
That's just a coincidence.
Well, it's a good coincidence. I think there are a lot, I talk to a lot of people myself, Joel, and the one thing that I find is most people lead a conservative lifestyle. They may view themselves as something else, but the reality is they're just trying to raise their families, buy or have a home, and have some semblance of a lifestyle. Is that what you found?
Absolutely agree. The biggest conservatives in America are African Americans, African American women especially. They don't want their kids smoking pot and all these crazy progressive harmful agenda. That's why the conservatives really need to reach out and talk about the big lie and stop allowing the socialists to use these groups by using this various racial rhetoric. That's what Obama does in office. He's a professional agitator. Doesn't know anything about economics, budgets, could care less about Ukraine and Iran. He views his job as to agitate the public. That's why he talks about Trayvon Martin could be his son. Every opportunity he's criticizing America as racist, criticizing the American dream. So does Michelle Obama. They're just trying to tear down the reality of a traditional America, which supports the free market system.
And violating human nature, because I think it's human nature to want to achieve and want to succeed. I've got a good black friend that I do business with, and I got into a conversation with him the other day. I said, "Oh, you own a home?" He goes, "Oh, yes." I said, "You're married?" He said, "Oh, absolutely." I said, "You have children at home?" "Oh, yes." "And you're concerned about the spending in the federal government?" "Absolutely. But I'm not a conservative." And I said, "Of course you're a conservative. You're living like one."
That's right.
"No, conservatives, there's too many racists in that side of the aisle."
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, I do identify myself as one thing, a conservative, and certainly I'm not a racist. I don't feel any animosity towards any American. And yet he's convinced. He talks like a Republican. He dresses like a Republican. He might as well be a Republican, but he fears, he's an independent, by the way, he fears the racism in the far right of the Republican Party. Is there racism in the Republican Party?
I don't think it exists. There's generally some amount of prejudice on every level of every person. You might like tall people or short people. You might not like a fat person. You might like someone who's intellectual and knowledgeable. You might dislike someone who, has their hair a certain way. But the idea that Republicans or conservatives are prejudiced against people with dark complexions in any way is absurd, and there's no basis for it. I have seen racism on the left. Obama's, when he was in Project Vote, 1992, he targeted black people to register them to vote. In his own words, he said to get Carol Moseley Braun elected. So he illegally targeted blacks for registration, assuming in an insulting manner that they would want to vote for someone else with a dark complexion. The Organizing for Action group, the Obama support group around the country, they are targeting Hispanics and Latinos. They say openly these people will vote for Democrats because they want more government programs. How racist and insulting is it to say that people with a darker complexion believe in getting handouts? That's the only racism that I've seen in politics is on the side of Obama and his organizing election campaign.
Yes, George Wallace was a Democrat. And, I look at all of these various federal agencies and some of the largest ones. Without exception, almost every single one of them has some awful, scandalous thing going on. What's the solution for people? Does your film come up with some solution that Americans can use to stop this growth of communism and socialism?
I think the film lays out the reality of what progressivism is, where it comes from, who believes in it and why, and what it actually achieves. When you follow the yellow brick road with this idea of utopia, that's what the Democrats believe. Their society is in a step-by-step progress toward this perfect future. If you realize, and I think the film shows, that this fantasy has been a disaster for 100 years. It's led to nothing but biological destruction and economic devastation. I think the film shows it in a humorous way and an entertaining way, as well as showing the reality of progressivism now in America as well as in the past.
Well, I can't wait for the film, and I look forward to sending you a picture to see if you recognize me.
All right.
I'll get in touch with you via cell phone, but I want to thank you today for coming on the show on short notice, and I look forward to your film.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you, Joel Gilbert. This is Forrest Wilson with AM 600, The Answer. You're listening to The Resistance. Well, I contend that we're all socialists at this point, and if we allow Barack Obama and his socialist agenda, communist agenda to continue, then you can actually call yourself a socialist. But I think there's some things that we can do. You know, Dr. Ben Carson, I hope he runs for elected office. I don't care what he runs for. I hope he runs for something. One of the things that he says that you can do is talk these things over with your family, your friends, your associates. And I think that's really the beginning. We've got to start talking to one another. I hope that you'll do the same. I hope that you'll take some of the information available on this show and reach out to your fellow man, because I believe truly that we are conservatives at heart. I think that it's the natural order. I don't think that some of the things being promoted by this government are the natural order. And I want to get on to something else, Memorial Day. This is a day when we celebrate the people who sacrificed something in the cause of freedom, our military men and women. I'd like to reach out and thank all of you listening to this broadcast for your service. There's a man being held right now in a Mexican prison. He's a Marine, and that Sergeant Andrew Tahmoressi, Tahmoressi, accidentally drove into Mexican territory simply by getting in the wrong lane and literally crossing the border. He had 3 legal registered guns. And I hope that you'll reach out to your representative and demand that somebody get this man free. He's been down there. This is day 55 for Sergeant Tahmoressi. Day 55 in a Mexican prison for doing nothing other than making a wrong turn. And I hope that you'll contact your elected representative and make the case to release Sergeant Andrew Tahmoressi. You're listening to AM 600, The Answer. Forrest Wilson. I'll be right back.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
And welcome back. AM 600, The Answer. Forrest Wilson, WBOB 600, AM 600. I want to mention one of our sponsors, Cam Anderson, State Farm Insurance. Cam, thank you for your support. You can get in touch with Cam at 904-381-1206. Like a good neighbor, Cam Anderson is there. 904-381-1206. And on to the VA. You know, on this Memorial Day, I wonder what Washington's thinking about the 40-plus veterans that have died on waiting lists, waiting for treatment from the Veterans Administration. And where's the commander-in-chief? I would think that the VA would be under his authority in some form or fashion. He is the commander. He's the civilian commander of the armed forces. And certainly Americans are being left behind. 40 so far that we know of, maybe more. And this Shinseki guy, the secretary of the VA, he should have the decency to step down. That would be the right thing to do. It would be better if our commander-in-chief would fire him and make an example of him. But is this what we can expect with the Affordable Care Act? I mean, really, you know, you look at what's happening, and this is a government-run health care program for our veterans. It should be top-notch. These are the defenders. These are the only thing that keep us from radical Islam and the others that would do harm to this country. But no, we're leaving people on waiting lists to die. And I think that's what we're going to get once this Affordable Health Care Act is fully implemented. You know, they have done delay after delay on this thing simply because they can't seem to pull together a website and pull together all the insurers. I read an article here lately where built into the Affordable Health Care Act, and of course, we'd have known it if somebody had read it and explained it, there's a subsidy for insurers. So basically, they went to the insurance industry as they wrote this monstrosity, and they told the insurers, if we insure everyone, there won't be any adverse selection. In other words, people that are so costly on these programs that it threatens your profitability. But wait, just in case that happens and you are a victim of the losses of adverse selection, then by all means, we'll put it back on the taxpayer. You see, we're all socialists at this point. Certainly once they implement this. And then they will know everything about you through the electronic data records. They'll have your financial transactions. They'll have your emails. They'll have your voice conversations. They'll have your text messages. They'll have your digital records, your digital medical records. I mean, where are they going to go with that? How are you going to oppose anything at that point? Can you oppose anything now? I know a lot of people are afraid. I know people listening to this broadcast are afraid. But you got to know, my brothers and sisters, there are a lot of people out there that aren't on board with this. In fact, they may not even know what's happening. But this VA scandal, I really think the president needs to come out and fire all the way down the chain anybody that had any responsibility for allowing this to happen. You know, my dad served in World War II. He was a tail gunner in a B-17 bomber, and he flew out of Polebrook, England. And he didn't talk to me a whole lot about World War II. I think in many respects he was concerned about some of the things that they did. They certainly bombed lots of innocent Germans, but certainly there were plenty of guilty. And my dad's been dead for 30 years, but I think about him and his sacrifice and the guys that he flew with. And I think about all the people over the millennia that have really been involved in war and different skirmishes. But the people that stand up for this country are something special. The people that wear the uniform deserve better. They are our defenders. They are the hope of America. And they believe in the ideal of America. I was at a Republican executive committee back around the time they were voting on this Affordable Care Act. And just so you know, a Republican executive committee, they're in every county across the nation. You can also find the Democrat executive committee, otherwise known as the Socialist Communist Party USA. But you can go to these meetings and you can listen to different speakers. And on this particular occasion, the room was jam-packed. And a lot of these Republicans were there voicing their concern over the Affordable Care Act, what they knew of it. There wasn't a lot of information available at the time other than the president kept saying, if you like your health care, you can keep your health care. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Well, there was a young man in the crowd who'd returned from Iraq. He'd been on several tours. And he stood up and he said something that I'll never forget. He said, while we were over there freeing the Iraqi people and fighting Saddam Hussein's forces and the insurgency that followed, you guys were back here implementing socialism. What in the hell was I fighting for? I'll never forget what that young man said, and I don't know whatever happened to him. But that's what I think a lot of veterans are feeling today. But listen, I hope you'll have comfort in knowing that there are many of us that are willing to stand with you. We're willing to stand up to this government, this feral government. as my last guest noted, many of the people in this administration are admitted communists and socialists, and if they don't admit it, they call themselves progressives. And I think you can look around and see the result of progressivism. It's very difficult for an economy to function when you remove the incentive. If you remove the incentive, things don't happen. I mean, look at government housing. It's government owned. Those people don't own it. There's absolutely no respect for it. And that's what's going to happen with the rest of the economy if we continue to allow the feral government to literally invade it. But back to the VA, I think that Shinseki should step down, and I think you should call your elected representative. I don't know if it'll do any good if you're a Democrat, but call a Republican. I'm not sure that'll do any good either. Look, here's the deal on this entire thing. Every year, the incumbents are reelected at a very high percentage. So we're only getting a few new citizen legislators in there with each election. And I'm really about the House of Representatives. It runs about 90% for the incumbent. In other words, 90% of the incumbents get reelected every single time. And this couldn't happen. This socialist agenda couldn't happen without the help of a lot of Republicans. And I'll say it again. Silence is consent. Consent is complicity. And I believe that we are all complicit at this point with the socialist communist agenda. And I hate to say it, but we may be on the road to becoming full-on socialists. I recognize that we are. I believe we are. If you want to chime in, we've got a few minutes left. It's 904-222-TALK, 904-222-TALK. That's 8255, 904-222-8255. I hope you'll call in. I'd love to hear from you. But I want to leave you with this. On this Memorial Day, you have to ask yourself, what were our veterans fighting for? What did they believe they were fighting for? Was it freedom? Was it the ideal of America? Was it a free market economy? Was it capitalism? I doubt, seriously, any of them were fighting for socialism. And I think we're already there. We certainly can't do anything about this debt. There's really only one way out. It's going to collapse. It's either that or inflation, the hidden tax, but that won't even cure it. You've got to get involved. It'll take you to cure what's happening in America, and that is our only way. So while I've got a few minutes left, I do want to say one more thing. There's a guy by the name of Jay Rockefeller. He's a senator from West Virginia. And he summed up the opposition to the Affordable Care Act as people being racist against Barack Obama. I want to tell you about Mr. Rockefeller. He is the son of one of the great oil tycoons, John D. Rockefeller. And that family was largely Republican. He's the only member of that family to serve as a Democrat in any elected office. And the only thing I can say about this old fool is he's wrong. I don't think that it's racist to oppose Barack Obama. I'm going to leave you with this song from the Eagles. And I want you to take it easy and have a great Memorial Day. And thank a veteran when you see him. We've got a lot of fighting to do to get the freedom back. Forrest Wilson, AM 600 WBOB, The Answer.